Hi, Emilia.
Hi.
Hi.
So we're not live right now. We're just the two of us.
No, we are live, I think.
Okay.
Okay. Molt bé. Doncs començarem ja les jornades. Bona tarda i benvingudes a aquestes jornades online Mirades Polièdriques a les violències de gènere. Estem molt contentes de l'interès que han generat aquestes jornades i de la rebuda que han tingut. Eren unes jornades que s'havien de celebrar de forma presencial a principis de juliol, però vam haver de buscar alternatives, òbviament, donada la situació, i sembla que aquest format online també ha permès que molta altra gent hi pogués participar. De fet, vam haver de tancar les inscripcions molt aviat perquè s'havia omplert l'aforament del Zoom, però estan també retransmetent en directe amb les jornades per YouTube Live, així que també altres persones ho esteu podent seguir a través d'aquest canal. Per tant, us donem la benvinguda a totes, sigui quin sigui el canal pel que ho estiguem seguint. I també un cop acabades les jornades podreu trobar totes les sessions gravades, els vídeos els podreu trobar a la web del projecte. Aquestes jornades s'emmarquen en el projecte Mirades Polièdriques a les violències de gènere, que és un projecte coordinat per la Universitat de Vic i per la Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, finançat per la convocatòria Recercaixa, i és un projecte que té com a objectiu analitzar les experiències i les construccions sobre violència de gènere en joves i també estudiar les pràctiques i experiències de prevenció sobre les violències de gènere. I tot plegat és mirar-ho des d'aquesta perspectiva interseccional, és a dir, tenint en compte diversos eixos de desigualtat i també una perspectiva holística que consideri com els diferents àmbits en els que es donen les violències. L'objectiu d'aquestes jornades és debatre i reflexionar conjuntament sobre aquestes qüestions amb diferents persones i entitats que treballen tant des del món de la recerca com en la intervenció sobre aquesta temàtica. I el format que hem preparat serà primer sentir la conferència i després obrir el debat, on anirem recollint les preguntes que ens pugueu anar escrivint a través del xat, ja sigui a través de YouTube o també a través del Zoom, anirem recollint les preguntes que tinguem i els anirem formulant a la ponent. Les jornades d'avui comencen amb la conferència d'Emilia Roig, que és directora del Centre per la Justícia Interseccional de Berlín, i tindrem també 4 sessions més, 3 taules rodones que seran dimarts que ve, dia 26, dijous 28 i dimarts 2 de juny, i la conferència de tancament que serà el dijous dia 4, on també es farà la presentació del podcast Zones F. Aquesta presentació del podcast serà un espai dinamitzat per lo relacional, on es compartiran dificultats, reptes i estratègies en relació a la realització de tallers en centres educatius. I abans de començar amb la conferència us volíem passar un vídeo molt curtet que dura 1 minut que ens han enviat lo relacional per preparar aquest podcast i per animar-vos a participar-hi. Per tant, passem ara a aquest vídeo i després comencem ja amb la conferència inaugural.
Hola, bona tarda, jo sóc la Patrícia.
Jo sóc la Desiree i juntes som lo relacional.
També estem participant de les jornades Mirades Polièdriques a la violència de gènere.
Ho estem fent des d'un petit poble al Baix Empordà que es diu Cruïlles, amb un podcast que hem anomenat Zones F.
En aquest podcast compartirem situacions difícils, reptes i estratègies que ens hem anat trobant quan fem tallers als centres educatius.
El podcast escoltarà l'últim dia de les jornades, que és el dia 4, i el que volem és que sigui un espai compartit. Per això estem fent aquest vídeo per convidar-vos a participar. El que ens agradaria, si voleu, és que ens podeu enviar comentaris, preguntes, dubtes que us aneu trobant quan treballeu les violències de gènere als vostres espais educatius, o si ja teniu accions, estratègies que us funcionen i que voleu compartir, estarem encantades d'escoltar-les.
Ens podeu enviar un correu a info@lorelacional.org
o un àudio per WhatsApp al 661 71 72 93. Ens trobem el dia 4 al final de les jornades.
Adeu!
Molt bé, doncs ja heu pogut veure el vídeo de lo relacional i anem ja amb la sessió d'avui a càrrec d'Emilia Roig, titulada Perquè la interseccionalitat no és un luxe. Emilia Roig és doctora en Ciències Polítiques i fundadora i directora del Centre per la Justícia Interseccional de Berlín, un centre que es dedica a combatre les desigualtats i discriminacions interseccionals a Europa. També és professora de la DePaul University de Chicago. Del 2007 al 2010 va treballar per la defensa dels drets humans en diverses organitzacions, com l'Organització Internacional del Treball a Tanzània i Uganda, a l'Agència Alemanya per la Cooperació Internacional a Cambodja i Amnistia Internacional. I també jurat en diversos premis literaris. Com podeu veure, ja tenim a la Emilia aquí. Hi, Emilia. Good afternoon.
Hi.
How are you?
Yes. Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
So welcome to the conference, and thank you very much for being here with us. We are very happy to be able to hear you today. And as you know, now we will have the video you sent us some days ago. Comencem, doncs, passant la seva ponència i després ens tornem a trobar en viu per tenir el debat. Fins ara.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to give the keynote of this very important conference on gender-based violence and an intersectional approach to it. My keynote will deal with intersectionality as a concept. So I've opted for a format where I will show the slide on the side. So I have sent the slide as well, and I will be recorded. I couldn't manage to do it two at the same time. I think there was a problem with the file compatibility on my computer. So I hope it's good for everyone and that you can see the slide and see me at the same time. So the title of this keynote is called Why Intersectionality is Not a Luxury. We hear about intersectionality increasingly in the European context and also specifically in the public policy field. However, many people who use the term and who try to also apply it to their work fail to really understand the political meaning of intersectionality, because essentially this is a political project more than a neutral or objective theoretical framework in the sense. I mean, of course, like I don't believe in objectivity, so that's why it shouldn't undermine the fact that intersectionality is a scientific theory, but however, it's also intersectional in the sense that it also deals with political projects and also movements for social justice. So I'm going on the first slide. Discrimination. So it's really important to understand that intersectionality can only be approached if we look at discrimination. Discrimination is really central to the meaning of intersectionality, and many times we tend to avoid it and try to represent it as a synonymous for diversity. In the sense, I would also say that diversity is intrinsically linked with discrimination, because there is no lack of diversity without discrimination, and discrimination impacts on diversity as well. Discrimination has always 4 dimensions, and many times the individual dimension of discrimination is put forward and overemphasized. The individual aspect of discrimination describes the ways in which discrimination occurs on an interpersonal basis. It would be, for example, a person A discriminating against a person B, mostly with intent and also with being aware of this. Of course, the legal and policy frameworks on discrimination have also added instances where discrimination is not intended and also not conscious. But this aspect of discrimination, which involves 2 people who are, through their actions and opinions, creating a discriminatory pattern, are only the tip of the iceberg. There are other dimensions of discrimination that ought to be taken into account if we want to truly understand what intersectionality is about. And those dimensions are structural dimension, the historical dimension, the institutional dimension of discrimination. So if the slide needs to be also moved forward. Then those dimensions of discrimination represent, so for the historical dimension, we're looking at the ways in which past events and past systems continue to have an impact on today's discriminatory pattern. For example, it's impossible to look at the discrimination faced by people of African descent and of North African descent or Southern African descent in France, in the French context, without understanding or truly analyzing the impact of French colonialism on the social fabric of France today. Similarly, it's impossible to understand truly or to analyze fully in a holistic way the gender pay gap in the Swiss context if we do not take into account that women in Switzerland only gained the right to vote in 1977, which is really late if we think about it. So this is the historical aspect. The institutional aspect concerns the ways in which people in institutions and in positions of power, through their decisions and their actions, create discriminatory patterns, but mostly unwillingly and also unwillingly and unconsciously. It has to do with implicit bias and in the ways in which implicit bias, meaning our unconscious prejudices that we harbor against people and the characteristics that we project onto them that have been ingrained in us ever since we were very little through images in the media, in books, in literature, in films that represent people in a certain way and impact on our perception of them. An example would be a teacher in a school that tend to believe unconsciously that girls are less apt and less competent at scientific subjects, and in this sense they will tend to give them lower grades even if they fare better, or they would the teacher would, for example, allocate them or suggest to them to go in another study path. But this would be motivated by her subconscious biases. And the other side of the coin would be that she would tend to promote young boys in this direction and to push them and to make sure that they get better in this subject. So that would be an example of institutional discrimination. But it's true for every people in positions of power. So it can be judges, police officers, it can be health personnel, mostly doctors, deciding on what diagnosis they are faced with and what kind of treatment they should give, and also on the way they interpret what the patients are saying. And so people in positions of power are essentially people who make decisions in our institutions and who may not look as, people in positions of power. So for example, teachers are people in positions of power. And so the aggregation of these decisions and this differential treatment, when it's multiplied by the number of people working in these organizations, it creates patterns of discrimination that we describe as structural discrimination. Structural discrimination gives us a statistical picture of discrimination in a certain field, in a certain societal field, be it in the school system or, for example, in the labor market, in the justice system, looking at the prison population, for example, or looking at management boards. And so we see, for example, when there's only 10% of women in management boards in Germany, that, and in other countries as well, I'm making up this statistic, but we can see then that we're faced with a discrimination pattern, which is structural discrimination. So this is for the four sides of discrimination. The problem right now in most of the programs that we deal with, so be it also a program on gender-based violence or a program to counter the gender pay gap or a program against racism in schools, let's say, that they tend to focus, next slide. They tend to focus on the individual aspect and overlook the historical, structural, and institutional aspect of discrimination. And this discrepancy between the four dimensions leads to a focus for measures meant to combat discrimination that focus on the individual level. They focus on behavior, on opinions, and do not look at the wider structures which enable such discrimination to take place in the first place. So if we look at gender-based violence in schools, for example, we could imagine that an individual level would just look at the perpetrators in this sense and looking at trying to discipline them or trying to infuse like a moralist tone and telling people how to behave and what to say. which is, of course, one of the dimensions or one of the types of measures that need to be implemented. But there's also another, if we look at the structural, historical, and institutional dimensions, it would mean that we are trying as well to impact on the school structures that are creating a hierarchy between girls and boys, and also who are excluding every people living outside the gender binary, so who do not identify as girl or boy or neither nor, and who get impacted as well by this hierarchy and the gender inequality and the violence that ensures. So that's why having a holistic approach would look at patriarchy as a system, and what in the school is driving a culture or reinforcing a hierarchy between boys and girls and between the binary and the non-binary people. And so that's why it's really important to look at the curriculum, looking at the school setting, the gender balance in the school as well. Is there representation of people who are not, who are diverse as well within these categories? Do we have gender non-binary people? Do we have trans people in the school as well who can, be referred to for the kids as role models, or where they can see themselves? Do we have also non-white people and religious and ethnic minorities in the school in the school personnel? So these are for example other measures that could be put in place next to the individual level. And so mostly when we focus on the individual level, another fact is that we tend to focus on the conscious and intentional dimensions of discrimination and overlook the unconscious and unintentional sides. What is important to notice as well is that when we look at difference, and that's I think something that is quite important, because many of us are really uncomfortable with difference. When we try to say, oh, we're not all, of course, we're all human, so that's absolutely out of question. We are all human, but we have differences between us. Some of us are Black, some of us, we have different skin colors, we have different religions, we have different genders. And so some people say, no, don't speak about the differences. Let's focus on, what brings us together. And so next slide. What we should always tackle is not difference in itself, but hierarchy. So the hierarchy that places different groups of people on a ladder where some of them are considered to be superior and others inferior. And I think that's quite central to the way we deal with discrimination and intersectionality, because hierarchy is what we're interested in. Difference in itself is not the problem. Difference is actually very positive. We want to live in a society where difference is valued, where it's seen, and where it's celebrated. What we want to dismantle is the hierarchy that is placing people in different levels and that allows violence against some groups of people, that allows their rights to be disrespected and their voices to be unheard. Now I'm going to look at another aspect, next slide, of discrimination, and that's the difference between equality and equity. In a school where there is violence, because violence is one of the symptoms of inequality and discrimination. So it can be exclusion, it can be violence, it can be also lack of access to resources. It's really varied in the ways in which discrimination materializes. And so on the left side of the picture, we have equality. So it means that all the people on this picture have the same, are given the same, and theoretically, that's a discourse, a meritocratic discourse that pertains, that says that reach everything in society, because we live in an egalitarian society or in a meritocratic society where if people work hard, they will manage. The only thing is that in such a framework, we overlook the structures in society that create advantages for some and disadvantages for others. We see that the blue person has not only accessories, and can really fully participate in the game, but also is on the ground that is high enough and with a fence that is low enough so that they can see the game properly and completely enjoy, have full access to it. The red person needs to be on her toes in order to see it. And so it's a situation where the structure is not playing fully for her. She has to make an effort in order to fully participate. And the yellow one can see through a hole in the fence, meaning that full participation is not given for them. And so in an egalitarian system, so I'm moving to the other side of the picture where equity is written, we see that it's possible to have full equality, or not full equality, but equity at least, if some people are given more than others according to the structures, not according to their potential or not according to their intrinsic competencies. Many times we tend to look at corrective measures, which would be, for example, having 3 blocks for the yellow one and 2 for the red and only 1 for the blue, as measures that are discriminating. We call it reverse discrimination because the blue person has less. What we don't see, however, is that the blue person doesn't need more because the structures are already playing for him, right? So that's really important to look at this in our society, knowing that in our society, we do not see the structures, they're invisible. So that's why we can be very quick to interpret this as a form of discrimination, as something unfair, right? And so I was mentioning this simply because it's very central as well to the concept of intersectionality, to look at the difference between equality, so formal equality, a meritocratic system, and then equity and an egalitarian system. So now let's move to the core of intersectionality, which is looking at identity, the different facets of our identity and the systems which create them. So identity is really complex, and it's it's moving, it's flexible, it's also changing depending on the context. So, for example, in the French context, that would be métis, which is biracial. In the German context, that would be black, and in the Senegalese context, for example, I would be white, right? So that's why it always depends on, the place where we're finding ourselves. For some people, they will be white no matter where they are. A white person in Germany will be white everywhere in the world. But for example, a Turkish person who's, migrated to Germany, or who lives in Germany, is in the minority, and in this sense is a racial minority for that sense, or ethnic and religious minority. But in Turkey, because this person belongs to the majority, to the cultural, ethnic, and religious minority, they would be white, right? And so if we look at all those categories that are looked on the slide, so next slide, so the slide on identity, there's the triad gender, class, race. So it's like the typical triad when speaking about intersectionality, and I added as well age and disability to it. It doesn't mean that they're hierarchized, but just showing that even if they're represented in different sizes, it's just like to give examples. And those categories are overarching categories that give information about who we are and how we are perceived to the world. So none of us is born as we think we are. I wasn't born woman, I wasn't born black, I wasn't born queer, for example, but what it means is that society is creating these differences. So it means that all of those are constructs. So I'm going to start with gender because I think this is the category which is the most contentious. But gender is not biological given, right? Of course, we have different genitalia, and that's why we've decided, or at least science and the medical system have decided to fix gender, or not the medical system, but more like our social norms have decided to fix on the genitalia to define if somebody is male or female, and to really fix on those two rigid genders. But science recognizes more than 5 genders, not only based on genitalia, but also on hormone levels, on chromosomes, also on anatomy. And so it means that the fact that we are born as male or female is constructed by our society, by different ways of expressing ourselves. So for example, if you look at my body language right now, it's not something that was inborn. It's something that was developed as well, because I looked at other women and how they speak, and I mimicked it from a very young age. So today I'm not aware of that anymore at all. So that's why I imagine that it's completely natural and innate, but it's not. And so that's why gender as a category should be considered to be it's really important to consider it as a category that goes beyond the gender binary. Any policies that entirely focus on men and women and who reinforce those two categories tend in the long term to reinforce patriarchy. Because patriarchy functions by having two categories of people who are placed in a hierarchy where the masculine and everything that is considered masculine is placed higher on the hierarchy rather than what's feminine. We can see that in the way we raise our children, for example. Many people say, oh yes, I'm completely open to gender neutral education, but only one way around. We see that when little girls are wearing pants and short hair and are really boyish, we find that quite we encourage that as well, because we find it good to have a girl that is active and not too girly. But when it's a boy that wants to wear skirts, long hair, and nail polish, or plays with dolls and unicorns, for example, then it creates some sort of discomfort. People are uncomfortable with this. Why? Because we continue to place the feminine below the masculine, and it's something that we teach our boys to reject from a very young age. And this is how patriarchy functions, with this hierarchy, with this ingrained hierarchy. And so having genders that are beyond this binary help as well dismantle patriarchy in the long term. I'm not going to spend too much time on class and race. We see that those categories are as well moving, and that, for example, socioeconomic background and education level are two different things. Some people can have a high socioeconomic background and low education level, and vice versa. So it can be moving as well in a lifetime. On race is an overarching category, which also poses some problems in the European context, because there's a reluctance to see race and to see racial difference, which is very, very problematic, because there is racism in Europe. And so trying to erase this category is very problematic, because it doesn't allow us to speak about racism as a system. Right? And disability as well is constructed simply because disability is based on the norm healthy and on the norm able, and those norms are constructs. If we look at 60, 70 years ago, Jews and Roma people and homosexuals were considered to be unhealthy in a medical sense, right? And this has evolved. We could as well say that being healthy is being alive, right? And we don't have this definition. It's also linked to the norm able, as in able is everything that can do what the norm can do, but also an able body is a body that can contribute to the capitalist system by producing, by also being manually active, etc., which is also a fallacy if we think about it. And so what I'm meant to say here is that identity is central to intersectionality, because we see that all those identities work together, and that a woman with disability who is also wearing a hijab and Muslim and from a higher education level, all those categories intersect to create very specific dynamics and effects. And what we're interested about are more the systems which create these categories. So what we see, next slide, is that we have capitalism, patriarchy, and racism as three systems that are also, objectively speaking, the systems that organize our labor market, that organize our social hierarchies, and they create our identities. For example, racism creates race. Capitalism creates class differences. Patriarchy creates the binary. It creates as well the hierarchy between men and women, right? And so we see that, also other types of discrimination, such as fat phobia, ageism, ableism, are the intersection of those three systems of oppression. And so I've written as well in small different sub categories or subsystems, which are they are byproducts of these grand systems. For example, heteronormativity, sexism, binarism, but also transphobia, homophobia are byproducts of patriarchy. Colonialism, nationalism, border regimes are byproducts of racism. But also, if we look at border regimes and colonialism and nationalism, they're also byproducts of capitalism. So it's difficult to represent it in a graphic way, simply because it's also very, interwoven, right? And so intersectionality is mostly interested with the systems which produce our identities and the underlying hierarchies which maintain inequalities. So identity is important, but systems are more important. And these are the phenomena that we should tackle. We should tackle the systems and the hierarchies. And I'm going to give you an illustration right now. So it's the next slide for the identity and systems, where I explain this. And then next slide again, where you have a drawing, slide 10. So I'm going to give you an example of a person. You know, when we focus on identity, we have a hypothetical person who might as well be, you know, real. So we have a Black, trans, Muslim, Roma, migrant, disabled, lesbian, working class person, right? So that's a hyperbolic example. So we have this person, and people who misunderstand intersectionality would say, oh yes, so intersectionality is about dealing with this very specific person, right? We deal with this person, and isn't really efficient, because then it would mean essentially that we're looking at a minority within minority. It's like statistically irrelevant. And what I would say is that instead of thinking this way and of having a trickle down approach, meaning we look at, for example, in the gender equality policies, we look at the most privileged of women, and then we see, okay, if the top managers who are women manage to crack the glass ceiling, then we manage to have an impact on all other women. So it will trickle down, right? And what I'm saying is that no, a trickle down approach has never really worked. What works is a trickle up approach. So the opposite. It means that if we manage to make the rights of this hypothetical person respected, her voice heard, her interests represented, and that she has access to economic, political, and cultural power, and that she lives safe and in our society, then we can be sure that all migrants, all Romas, all Black people, all Muslim people, all trans people, etc., will have that access as well, because she is the most marginalized of all, right? So if this person has access, then it means by inference that every other person will have it too. So instead of focusing on this individual, what we're looking at is that we have a much bigger reach if we use a trickle up intersectional approach to inequality discrimination, right? And here, to finish, I would like to quote my favorite quote by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's the inventor of the term intersectionality, and we're very happy to have her as well as our president. And she says, a truly intersectional feminism can reach everyone on the planet. So here in the original quote, it's the word feminism. We might as well use another word. We might as well, a truly intersectional public policy can reach everyone on the planet, or a truly intersectional framework can reach everyone on the planet. So I will stop here. I'm really looking forward to our Q&A session next week. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much. Hello?
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, hello.
You hear me? Yes, I can.
I can hear you.
Okay, now. So thank you very much, Emilia, for your really interesting talk. Now we will open the debate. I think that we still don't have any question, but I have some questions prepared. Obrim ara l'espai per les preguntes que li vulgueu fer. Podeu fer preguntes a través del xat en català, en castellà o en anglès, i ja ens encarregarem nosaltres d'anar-ho traduint. Si ho esteu veient per YouTube Live, també podeu escriure les vostres preguntes i ho anirem recollint. Per tant, estem pendents. Em sembla que de moment no en tenim cap, així que bueno, farem una que teníem ja preparada per començar a trencar el gel. So, Emilia, one of the questions we would like to ask you is, what do you think that are the current challenges for struggling against gender-based violence from this intersectional perspective? Let me just translate it into Catalan before you start. La pregunta que li volíem fer a l'Emilia Roig per començar era que quins creia que eren els reptes amb els que ens podríem trobar ara mateix per aquesta lluita contra les violències de gènere des d'aquesta perspectiva interseccional. So when you
so the main challenge, so I think it's because we're used to seeing social issues and discrimination as one axis phenomena. So when we speak about gender violence, the first idea that comes to our minds is gender, man, woman. When we speak about discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, then we have an image that comes to mind, and we see a gay man or a lesbian woman who are gender conforming and also without disability, and also white mostly. And so that's why we tend to put people in boxes that are not representative of the diversity of the group that we're dealing with. And so I think the challenge is to unlearn categories and social categories and to make them more inclusive. So the example that I gave at the end of the keynote is really helpful in that regard, because what intersectionality asks us to do is to expand notions. So when we speak about women, it's to see all women in this category, to see women with disabilities, to see Black women, Muslim women, to see lesbians, to see old women, young women. And so that's really what we need to do. We need to unlearn the ways we've been seeing social categories so far.
Okay, thank you. We already have some questions from the people here in the chat. Mm-hmm. One of it is how the queer theory contributes to the intersectional approach.
Sorry, because I was reading the chat in the meantime. Can you ask the question again? Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me say it in Catalan first. Tenim una de les preguntes que han sortit al chat per Zoom és com creu que la teoria queer contribueix a aquesta aproximació interseccional. So it would be this question on how the queer theory contributes to the intersectional approach.
Oh, well, it does very much contribute to it, because queer theory is about breaking the binary. So it's about breaking the gender binary, and also, of course, many other things. But essentially, it's about trying to deconstruct patriarchy as a system and understand why, heterosexuality and heteronormativity is placed above as the only norm and the only possible sexuality and only possible way of desiring and existing in the world. And so that's why it definitely contributes to intersectionality, in that it deconstructs categories, social categories, and the social category of gender. And that's why it's really important to not stay fixed on the idea of men and women when we speak about gender equality policies, for example, which is mainly the case in national governments and European institutions, that we fail to break the binary. So yeah, it's an enormous contribution to it. But okay. I would say that it's not like that queer theory contributes to intersectionality. It's more like they're intricately linked to each other and feed each other in many ways.
Mm-hmm. There's another question that says that in your opinion, do you think that the concept of intersectionality should be like a substitute of other acceptions of gender equality?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think that we still need to have a concept of gender equality, and I would like to, instead of speaking about equality, I'd like to speak about justice instead. Mm-hmm. Simply because having a justice paradigm helps us to approach the current hierarchies that we have in a more holistic way. If we keep speaking about equality only, then we can be as well content with frameworks that do not produce justice. And an example of this would say, oh, okay, so we want men and women to have equal pay. So then it means that we need to have women working at the same level of men in companies, but we don't put in question what it means to adapt to the current masculine model that we have. And that the current patriarchal model that we have, which is it's neither good for men nor women, and so we would have to put it in question. And this is what justice is about. It's about really trying to create new systems and to question profoundly the institutions, the systems that we live in and that produce injustice and inequalities.
Okay, we have another one. I tried to translate it to you. It says that many of the policies, both from institutions and other kind of programs, that want to struggle against discrimination are organized like for different identities. So there are different units or departments for women, for LGBT people, for youth, for people with disabilities. So how would this have to be like reorganized to
So yeah, they don't need to be reorganized. That's also good to have focus on several people, several groups of people, because they have each different interest, and also, I mean, not different interest, but different needs, I would say, and also to some extent different interests. So it's fine to not like have everything under the banner of we want justice, but more having subgroups is fine. But it's more to ensure that in these groups, everyone is included. So if we have a program working on people with disabilities, we want to make sure that migrants, asylum seekers, that women, that young people, old people, but also ethnic minorities, religious minorities and queer people are included in this category. And that's the same with, when we work with the category women, making sure that all types of women are recognized and have an equal voice in these programs. So it wouldn't have necessarily to be reshuffled completely. Yes, but that's what I would say at this point.
Okay, thank you. En tenim un altre del YouTube Live també, una altra de les preguntes que pregunta sobre la relació entre la perspectiva aquesta més individualista i el neoliberalisme. So, Emilia, we have another question from YouTube Live that says, do you think that individual perspective is overestimated because of neoliberalism?
Yes, absolutely. We live in a society where the identity and the individual takes up enormous space. And in one hand, I mean, because nothing is only bad or good. So, I mean, of course, there is the positive side to it, meaning that we attribute more weight to well-being of people and to making sure that people are recognized. But on the other hand, it's negative because we do not recognize the systems that create inequalities in the first place. And we cannot see ourselves as a collective. And that's the main issue, because humanity is a collective, and currently neoliberalism comes in the way of transcending identities. And so I'm saying this, and I'm very careful and cautious while saying this, because transcending identities doesn't mean that we shouldn't see race anymore, because it's too early. We need to continue seeing differences such as race, sexual orientation, and different identity traits that are the basis for discriminations. But our aim is to go beyond this. And in order to go beyond this, we shouldn't overinvest identities and overinvest people with these identity traits, but more tackle the systems that create these identities and that underlie the differences and the inequalities.
Mm-hmm. Tenim una altra pregunta sobre les diapositives i sobre la mida de les diferents identitats que hi sortien. We have another question in relation to your presentation, where in the image we had like different circles with different sizes in relation to identities. And the question is why there were like different sizes in relation to race or gender or age.
Yeah, of course. So the sizes doesn't really relate to the importance of groups, because there is no hierarchy between identities. So first of all, I wanted to say that. Second of all, I put race as a slightly bigger circle, simply because in the European context, it tends to be completely overlooked and undermined. And so I wanted to go against this tendency to undermine race. And so that's why I put it in a bigger circle. Then age, I put in a very small circle, simply because it doesn't have the same history of discrimination as other identity traits, which are the basis for structural systemic discrimination in a more consistent way. For example, age can be sometimes an advantage, sometimes a disadvantage, and all of us were young at some point, and most of us will be old. So that's why, in different, it's always like a transversal category which plays in. An example would be that age can be, old age can be a positive attribute if two other categories are met, being male, white, or three, male, white, and wealthy. So an old, white, wealthy man, in his case, age is even adding to his status and to his social capital, in a sense. If it's a woman, it changes drastically, because an old woman is losing a lot of, is going down on the social hierarchy with age. And that's, the same if instead of being rich, the man is poor. A poor old man is not gaining weight on the social hierarchy. So that's why it's really important to look at age as a transversal category. And then there are other, and I don't know if it's a different question. Oh, yeah. Gordophobia. So speaking about fat phobia, I don't know if this question was related to it.
Yeah, it's asking why it was like set apart, the gordophobia.
Okay. So it was set apart with ageism, fat phobia, because and also ableism, because those systems, for example, fat phobia is the intersection of patriarchy, capitalism, and racism. Simply because the looking at the slim body as the norm is also very racialized and represented as well by European features. In many ways. And then secondly, with patriarchy, of course, because the female body is put under scrutiny and is constantly criticized, commented, and like a natural body as it isn't allowed to exist in our patriarchal society. And capitalism, simply because symbolically slimness represents self-control, success, beauty, and is attributed to beauty norms that are very capitalistic in essence. And I'm forgetting something as well about, the medical system as well is contributing to fat phobia, simply because it represents fat bodies or unhealthy bodies. And this is inherently interwoven in notions of health and capitalism as well. And so that's why I put it on the side, because it's intersected and it doesn't belong to either patriarchy or racism or capitalism fully. And that's the same with ageism, as I said, and ableism, because disabled people with disabilities are created as being disabled by all three systems. I don't know if I talked about it in the talk. I can't remember. Did I?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
There's another question. It's a little bit long. It says that when you were talking about the possibility of erasing the discrimination for a person that is situated in different axes of discrimination, when you said that when you eliminate the discrimination that people is suffering for a single axis, then people that suffer any of other discriminations can be like erased. The question is, as I understood, it seems to be a more like a multiple layer discrimination approach and an intersectional one. Can you explain more, please?
Sorry, can you repeat the last bit?
Yes, so it seemed that this last part of your presentation, when you said that we are going like against one of the acts of discrimination that this person is suffering, then we can like erase
I can explain.
Suffering. It seemed like a multiple layer discrimination and not an intersectional approach.
Okay, so I can explain this simply by saying that if we I will take the example of the fight against homophobia. So many times the fight against homophobia in the European context is feeding anti-Muslim sentiment and anti-migrant sentiment by representing homophobia as something that comes from specific cultures, especially Islam. And so it may open society to more to accept queer lifestyles and to accept queer relationships. So that would be like an advance on one front, and then the other one would be that Muslim communities are further marginalized. Another example that I can give would be the fight against gender inequality, and for example, making sure that women employed on the formal labor market that are mostly privileged and hold diplomas would be working more on the labor market. So it would mean that within the company, the gender pay gap would be leveled a little bit. But for this to happen, they will be employing women, racialized women, migrant women who are underpaid and marginalized on a semi-formal or informal labor market, which would mean that inequalities within the category of women would become bigger. So only if we take race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, and all relevant factors into account when we deal with public policy issues can we create more sustainable solutions that do not discriminate or that do not further discriminate against already marginalized groups.
Okay. We have another question in relation to what do you think that are the contributions from the colonial theories to intersectionality?
Oh, of course. I mean, it's definitely part of it. It means that decolonial theories, post-colonial theories are intrinsically linked to intersectionality, because what it's all about is trying to analyze power and trying to understand what power does to social inequalities and social injustice. And power was created, or power imbalances were created for a big part by colonialism. And so that's why a decolonial and post-colonial approach to intersectionality, or at least that the two are intimately linked.
Okay, let me see if we have some more questions. Yeah, so there's another one that says, hi, Emilia, thank you very much for your keynote speech. Do you think that there is a communication gap between intersectional theory and public policy? If so, how can we address it?
Okay, so yes, there's definitely a gap. Why? Because public policy likes to mostly, okay, I'm going to say that intersectionality is a very political project. It's a political project, it's a subversive project, it's a disruptive project. And public policies do not want disruption, they want solutions. And so that's why it's many times very difficult for public policies or people who design and implement public policies to understand that some of the things we've been doing have been done completely wrong, and that it will take time to undo them or to create alternative ways of doing. And that's where the knot is coming, and also because, so I think in a quite neutral way, and also because we're putting in question a whole discourse in our societies that has placed certain people above others, and public policies are many times very oblivious of these, more fundamental conversations that needs to be had, and that's why. I would say we need more time, and time is also a factor, because public policies, they want fast results, they want frameworks, they want deliverables and things that work, things that they can sell. But intersectionality doesn't, if it's applied well, cannot give that. And that's why, I mean, it's a revolutionary theory that can nevertheless be applied. It's just that we need to unlearn and think of new ways of doing public policy. So it's not impossible, and I see that it's being done currently, but mainly what comes out of it is a little bit of irritation, so, okay, so what does it mean? We can't apply intersectionality very neatly in our current framework. How are we going to do that? And that's the problem.
Okay. I think that related to that, let me say this in Catalan first. Some people is asking that we also translate the questions. Una altra de les preguntes que també li volíem fer era si que des de diverses posicions s'ha dit que hi ha hagut com un blanquejament, no, de la teoria de la interseccionalitat quan s'ha aplicat tant a la recerca com en les polítiques públiques, i també li volíem preguntar doncs, què es podia fer per evitar aquestes pràctiques o per tenir-les en compte. So, Emilia, one of the questions we also wanted to ask you is that, as you know, numerous scholars have pointed at the risk of whitewashing when applying intersectionality frameworks, both in research and in public policies. So our question would be, what should be done to avoid such practices?
I think what needs to be done to avoid whitewashing and watering down the meaning of intersectionality more generally is to shy away from difficult conversations. So in order for this not to happen, we have to make sure that when we speak about intersectionality, we speak about power, privilege, and disadvantage, and that it doesn't become an empty word that is trendy and can conveniently be applied to just tick a box. So that's a big process, and that's all I can say as an answer, is that really making sure that power and privilege are always part of the conversation on intersectionality.
Okay. també en relació al context que estem vivint, una altra de les preguntes que ens sorgia era com es podia pensar o què ens podia portar aquesta perspectiva interseccional per entendre també doncs, la situació que estem vivint ara de confinament, no? I també especialment en relació a la violència que es pateix a casa. So, Emilia, a question more related to the current situation. How do you think that we can think about this lockdown and the current situation in general from an intersectional perspective, and specifically in relation to the violence suffered at home that is really deeply related to gender-based violence?
Yeah. So I have to tell you as well, I'm in Germany, and in Germany we don't have a lockdown. So it means that throughout the whole pandemic, we have been able to go out freely, to go to parks, to just be on the streets. And so that's why the impact of the lockdown has been slightly less than in other countries like Spain, Italy, France, where the lockdowns have been very repressive and also extremely rigid. And I'm speaking for the French context mostly because this is the one I know best, where my family is, where suddenly the police and the military have been given a lot of power to enforce the lockdown, and it has widened inequalities and in a tremendous way. Simply because people who are, in a lockdown in their secondary home in the south of France with a big garden are suffering less than people who are living in cramped spaces with many family members in the outskirts of Paris, where there's absolutely nothing around. And of course, in these situations, domestic violence is exacerbated, but not only. I mean, of course, domestic violence is happening in all social backgrounds, so even very rich people in the countryside of France, are experiencing domestic violence too. Many times it's not recognized as such because it doesn't fit the narrative. But I would say that what can be done to apply an intersectional lens to it is to really also at this stage put in question the system, our system that has rendered some people invisible, some jobs invisible, some vulnerabilities invisible, and to really make sure that that we understand what processes and what systems, what societal structures have created these inequalities. And so it's too early to really, or I mean, it's never too late, I would say, but it's a little bit early to, or I would frame it different. I would say that we need a lot of patience to create other paradigmas, and this is, I feel, the slippery slope that we're finding ourselves on, because currently I feel around me the urge to go back to normal no matter what, and to just like go back to normal and to put capitalism back on its feet, and it hinders us from really speak or really thinking about alternative ways and taking the time. And time is so precious and so important, and currently we're giving back the time to our capitalist system in ways that might not enable us to really bring change. And that's it's a little bit abstract what I'm talking about right now. But yeah, at this stage, that's all I can say, really.
Ok. Farem un parell o tres més de preguntes. En teníem ja una aquí d'abans, que perdoneu que no l'havia vist, sobre com mantén la relació entre els drets humans i la interseccionalitat. So we are going to take 2 or 3 more questions. We had one that someone asked before. It says, how do you understand the relationship between human rights and intersectionality?
Well, human rights, it's such a vast discourse, and it can be also many times instrumentalized, that it's difficult to give an answer, like a very clear, definite answer to this. I mean, human rights, or, access is a human right. Mm-hmm. Equitable access to resources, to political voice, to economic resources, to protection is a human right. So it is definitely linked to it. But I like to have a justice approach rather than a rights approach, because it goes beyond rights. And that's why, in this sense, I mean, yeah, of course, intersectional justice is linked to human rights, but I'm not sure if it answers the question.
Okay. And we had another one, maybe the last one, because I don't see any other question. Una altra pregunta que diu: com podem aplicar de forma pràctica accions per la igualtat de gènere o la justícia de gènere de forma interseccional? So this question is asking how can we apply like specific actions for gender equality or for gender justice from an intersectional perspective. So I think is asking about like a really concrete and specific and practical actions.
Yeah. Well, there are several questions that we can ask ourselves to ensure that we have an intersectional approach. And the first question is, are we including everyone in the target group? You know, do we forget anyone? Are we having in mind the most marginalized of all people in this group? And that's more like, you know, the little image that I showed with this hypothetical person. Do we have this person in mind? The second question that we can ask is, are there some patterns of discrimination within this category that are invisible for us and that we could uncover? And this requires some analysis and to really try to speak as well to the people we're working with and knowing, okay, are there some discriminatory patterns that we do not see? And the third question would be, by doing the action that we're currently undertaking, are we furthering or are we making some types of discrimination worse? So again, it's not an easy question to ask, and it's also not easy to answer, but it requires some work to at least make sure that it doesn't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think that we don't have more questions. And
yeah, thank you very much, Ingrid. I just saw as well in the chat, and for everyone who participated, it's I wish I could have seen you in person. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to say that before it goes in the chat.
Don't worry. Thank you very much, Emilia, for your participation, for your interesting contributions, both in your presentation and for this round of questions and answers. Moltes gràcies a totes també les que heu participat tant per Zoom com per YouTube. Ara no tinc les dades, però crec que era quasi 200 persones, no sé si ara m'ho poden confirmar. Abans de marxar, el que sí que us volíem recordar és que les jornades continuen. Com sabeu, hi ha diverses sessions. Dimarts vinent tenim la primera taula rodona que es titula Intervencions en la cruïlla, com apliquem la interseccionalitat en la prevenció des de les violències de gènere, amb la participació de Patsili Toledo, Lucas Platero i Lídia Casanovas. Dijous 28 tindrem la segona taula sobre les fronteres del gènere, amb Miquel Missé, Maribel Cárdenas i Míriam Solà. I el dimarts 2 de juny tenim la tercera taula rodona sobre pornografia amb Cristina Garayzábal, Sílvia Merino i Amat Molero. I llavors tancarem les jornades el dijous dia 4 amb la conferència de Benita Sundaram i amb el podcast que heu vist abans la presentació de lo relacional. Per tant, ens veiem dimarts que ve a les 5 amb aquesta primera taula rodona. I volia només despedir-me. So thank you very much, Emilia, for everything, and hope to see you in person someday.
Thank you so much for the organization. It's been it's gone really, really well. Like everything was perfect. Also, technically speaking, really, thank you so much. It's been really good. Yeah, so wishing you good luck for the rest of the conference, and yeah, looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yes.
Bye.
Goodbye.